All right, the floor is yours, Nayan.
Okay. Thanks, Melanie, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for taking our time to be joining the steering committee meeting for the RGB MPO Safe Streets Action Plan for All. Next slide. We have a brief agenda for today is to quickly go over on the project overview, scope of work, and then jump into public engagement as well as some preliminary findings from the collision analysis. Next slide. Here's the list of our steering committee meeting members. And the RGV MPO team as well as the consultant team. Next slide. As we all know, that that RGV MPO was awarded SS4A funds for developing a comprehensive safety action plan for all modes of transportation. And as a part of the project, we identified the goals of the comprehensive safety action plan, which includes implementation of proven safety solutions, policies, and programs to eliminate preventable fatal and severe collisions by 2050, uh, and then identifying the countermeasures that are based on the 5Es, and ensuring that multimodal safety investments are made in a manner that is fair and equitable for all residents. Next slide. Um, the scope of work is basically looking into existing conditions, developing the vision and goal, conducting a class data analysis, and developing a communication and engagement, public outreach plan, and executing it. Um, all of the task has been completed, and moving forward, we are in the process of identifying short-term, mid-term, and long-term policies and strategies that can be implemented, taking into consideration equity and land use, and then finally develop the draft and final SS4A action plan. Next slide. The schedule, as we agreed to, um, our plan is to have the comprehensive safety action plan adopted by the RGV MPO, the final action plan by March 18th of this year. And as I mentioned earlier, that we are in the process of developing countermeasures and policies and programs um, to be included as a part of the comprehensive safety action plan. Next slide. One of the tasks was to reach out to the public or the community and get their feedback on the safety issues and what needs to be addressed. We developed a comprehensive public outreach plan and executed. And I'm going to ask Ellison to provide a summary of the community outreach and engagement process that has been implemented for this project. Ellison?
Yes, thank you. So as Nayan mentioned, we put together a public engagement plan. A couple of the first steps involved was developing a project-specific website that gave an overview of the project, its status along the way, as well as an interactive map feature, which we'll talk about in a little bit. At the same time, we also developed a logo specific to this project. We held what we're calling meetings, workshops, pop-up events in 2 rounds. The first one was back in June in Weslaco, where we met with several of the stakeholders, some staff members, and regional transportation providers. And it served as a visioning session to get a better understanding of issues and concerns at that kind of higher policy decision maker level. And then in September, we went out into the general public community, and we tagged along onto already existing community events in Brownsville and Harlingen, both the farmers market and market at Wild August. And so we spoke to probably about maybe 100, 150 people between these 2 events. And it gave us an opportunity not only to get feedback verbally, but we also encouraged folks who were holding any kind of technology devices in the moment to be able to go onto the website and use the interactive map to pinpoint any of their areas of concern. Then there's just a couple other small highlights. We had bilingual staff at the events, and we also purchased some branded giveaways in the hopes that that would also encourage more folks to speak with us. So slide. This just highlights what I mentioned about our project website. It's been updated along the project progress, and this also highlights the map that we had for the community to be able to use. Slide. And this highlights what the feedback we received from the community in general was. We tried to categorize them with like concerns. And so it came feedback came in ways of pedestrian-friendly infrastructure, basically wanting better maintained sidewalks, or just increased use of sidewalks, putting more into the community. They also talked about traffic congestion and potential ways for improvement of traffic flow. They brought to our attention some safety concerns and wanting some more visible traffic enforcement. And then some more simplistic things like lighting and potholes, and even some things that may not necessarily fall under this project, but may be good to know from your constituents in general. And so with that information, we took it all from plotting on the map, and then Nyan's team has continued to use it. So Nyan, I will pass it back to you.
Thanks, Alison. So as a part of the project, we conducted the collision analysis based on the collision data available on the TxDOT website. And we have some results out of it. In total, what we have is that within the RGV MPO area, excluding Cameron, Hidalgo, Starr County, and City of Brownsville and Harlingen, there were 26,619 collisions, out of which 253 resulted into fatalities and 1,657 resulted in total collisions that resulted into fatalities and severe injuries. Within the RGV MPO area, 992 involved pedestrians and approximately 507 bicyclists were involved in it. And the slide and the summary in the table provides for each agency what we evaluated, the collision analysis or the summary statistics of it. Next slide. What we did is we conducted the collision analysis, developed the collision profiles, and then started to develop the high injury network. The high injury network was developed based on a weighted scoring system. And just to summarize it, that wherever we had a fatality or a severe injury, we assigned 3 points to it. Minor injury collisions were assigned 2 points, and possible injury collisions were assigned 1 point. Once we assigned the points to each collision based on the severity, we conducted a geospatial analysis utilizing the GIS software to have the spatial distribution of the collisions on a GIS map level. Next slide. Within the Rio Grande Metropolitan Planning Organization area, in total, we had about 88,192 collisions, about 253 fatalities, and 1,404 serious injury collisions that occurred. Uh, Next slide. This slide illustrates the violation category, the mode of collisions, the manner in which the collisions happened, and the lighting condition. The one what I want to highlight, rather than going into each and every component, the key findings within the RGV MPO area, that 32% of the collisions were attributable to unsafe speed, 29% of them were attributable to automobile right of way, and 72% of the total collisions that occurred during the daylight. Next slide. The collision profiles that were determined based on the collision analysis. Um, Number one was ranked to be a broadside collisions. Number two was to be unsafe speed. Number three was automobile right of way. And number four was hit object. And as we go over into other jurisdiction, we're going to see that the collision profiles are the same within each jurisdictional boundaries. The only thing, it might be the numbering. That broadside might be number three in some jurisdiction, and unsafe speed might be number one. But overall, within the RGV MPO entire area, regardless of the jurisdictional boundaries, the profiles are same, which are broadside, unsafe speed, automobile right of way, or hitting an object. Next slide. This slide illustrates the high injury network, specifically for the corridors within the Rio Grande Valley MPO region. Next slide. And we have provided a tabulation of the 10 top high injury network corridors with the risk points and the type of collisions associated or that occurred along the corridors. Next slide. The map illustrates the high injury network related to the top 10 intersections within the RGV MPO area. And the next slide summarizes the same 10 intersections with the collisions and the risk points associated with each of them. Next slide, Melanie. Within Cameron County, there were 6,547 collisions, out of which 21 resulted into fatalities and 137 resulted into serious injuries. Next slide. The key findings within Cameron County, 28% of the collisions were attributable to unsafe speed, and 19% of them were attributable to automobile right of way, and 65% of them occurred during daylight conditions. Next slide. The collision profiles, as I mentioned earlier, that the four profiles that were identified are the same. However, the ranking is different or may be different for each jurisdiction. Within Cameron County, hitting the object was the topmost collision profile, followed by broadside, unsafe speed, and automobile right of way. Next slide. The high injury network along the corridors within Cameron County is illustrated on the map. Next slide. A summary of the corridors with the collisions and the risk points associated or assigned for each corridor within Cameron County. Next slide. The map. Um, I think something is wrong with this one. Um, yeah, the table summarizes the high injury network for the intersections with the collisions and the risk points associated with it. Within Hidalgo County, we had a total of 59,449 collisions, with 191 resulting into fatality and 981 resulting into serious injury. Next slide. The key violation category within Hidalgo County, 33% of them were attributable to unsafe speed, and 29% of them were attributable to automobile right of way. And 73% of the total collision occurred during daylight conditions. Next slide. The collision profile, same as RGB MPO. Broadside was the topmost profile, followed by unsafe speed, automobile right of way, and hitting the object. The high injury network for at a corridor level within Hidalgo County is illustrated on the map and summarized in a tabular format. On the next slide, please. Um, the map in front of you illustrates the intersections from the high injury network perspective, the top 10 within Hidalgo County, and they are summarized on the next slide in a tabular format and also included in the package for the steering committee meeting today. Next slide on Star County. Within Star County, we had a total of 2,472 collisions, 7 of them resulting into fatality and 40 of them resulting into serious injuries. Next slide. The key violation category within Star County, 35% of them were attributable to unsafe speed, 19% of them were attributable to automobile right of way, and 69% of them occurred during daylight situation. One key thing I want to highlight on it is that if we look at RGB MPO or the 3 county regions, when we look at the collisions, majority of them on an average about 60% occurred within a speed limit zones of 30 miles per hour. Next slide. The collision profiles were the topmost was hitting the object, followed by unsafe speed, broadside, and automobile right of way. The high injury network for along the corridors within Star County is illustrated on the map and tabulated with the risk points on the next slide. The high injury network for the intersections is illustrated on the map as well as summarized in a tabular format with the risk points for each intersection. Next slide. Within city of Brownsville, there were 13,368 collisions, out of which 24 resulted into fatality and 191 into serious injuries. Next slide. The key violation category, 33% was attributable to unsafe speed, 25% of them were attributable to automobile right of way, and 73% of them occurred during daylight conditions. Next slide. The collision profile. The topmost was the broadside, followed by unsafe speed, automobile right of way, and hitting an object. The corridor level high injury network is illustrated on the map and also summarized in a tabular format with the number of collisions and the risk points for each of the corridor. This map illustrates the 10 intersections on the high injury network within the city of Brownsville that were identified based on the collision analysis. And the next slide provides a tabulation of those 10 intersections with the type of injury collisions as well as the risk points at each location. Similar to the earlier jurisdictions within city of Harlingen, there were 6,356 reported collisions, out of which 10 of them resulted into fatality and 55 of them resulted into serious injury. Next slide. With 38% violation category attributable to automobile right of way and 30% was attributable to unsafe speed. The key thing or the key finding within city of Harlingen, if we look at the other jurisdiction, the automobile right of way violation category was number 2, but in Harlingen, that category comes out to be number 1. The collision profiles, broadside was the number 1 profile that was identified, followed by automobile right of way, unsafe speed, and hitting an object. The high injury network at the corridor level is highlighted on the map and also tabulated on the next slide with the collisions and the risk points along each corridor that was calculated. The map in front of you highlights the 10 intersections on the high injury network, and the next slide summarizes those 10 intersections with the risk points and the number of collisions at each location. Next slide. Before we talk about the next steps, I would like to take a pause and see if there are any questions that we can discuss or we can address it.
Are there any questions for Nayan and the TJKM team?
Yes, so this is Chris Nelson with the City of Brownsville. I wanted to get your opinion. What do you think on the total number of collisions? Because I noticed you said it was like 88,000 for the whole region, for the MAB of the MPO. I'm thinking that the MPO region it's technically like 1.5 million people, right, for the census, but I mean, you can argue maybe it's closer to like 2 million in actuality, but still, I mean, 88,000, that seems like quite a lot. Like that's like 4% of people. It's really more like 8% of people if you consider that a collision actually involves 2 different vehicles, right? And then those are just the collisions that are reported to law enforcement. So it seems like kind of a high number to me, just like in general. But I'm assuming that you worked with other cities. Is that like similar to what you've seen in other places?
Um, I think looking at the overall jurisdiction and the number of miles, it might be not a very high or significant number that might set the RGV MPO area to be on a higher side. But you bring a good point, Chris. We will definitely look into it and get back on that part. We will try to address it into our safety action plan.
Yeah, and then I was also just wondering, do we have any additional insight on what might be the catalyst for some of these accidents? I noticed looking at the data that a lot of these accidents, the drivers are only going 30 miles per hour, but also in a lot of cases, excessive speed was cited as an issue. Does that mean like potentially they were in like 30-mile-per-hour areas, like they were in residential streets, but they were speeding. They were actually going like 40 or 50, and then is maybe like distracted driving a part of it, where maybe they like on their phones. I know it might be hard to get like widespread data on that, but do we have like any kind of insight on what might be causing it, so that way we can rectify those issues?
As we are identifying the safety measures, we are looking into it. Uh, Unfortunately, I don't have an answer for that right now.
Hey, Nine, can
Ma'am,
I
yes,
respond?
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So, Chris, yes, unsafe speed. So there are different attributes, and we can definitely separate them out. And to some extent, we have separated that out. So unsafe speed is only related to what you're saying, that if someone is driving at a higher speed limit than the posted speed limit for a particular corridor, then that falls into unsafe speed. Distracted driving is a separate attribute altogether. So distracted driving will be shown separately. Within distracted driving, now that distraction is because of the cell phone or because someone was giving their kid a banana or a fruit or a juice. We don't know that exactly, because that kind of detailed information is not written, that we can exactly say that the distracted driving was only because they were on the cell phone or mobiles. That we cannot separate it out. But yes, as far as speeding and distracted driving, that can be separated out.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
Thank you, Ruda. Are there any other questions?
Yes, I have a question. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we
Yes.
can.
Okay. Were you all going to collect any traffic volumes to do any crash rates? And were you going to provide the number of road miles and mile lanes in each county for comparison, especially along the corridors that you're identifying as in the high injury network?
Benjamin, we are not going to be collecting the traffic volumes and calculating the crash rate within each jurisdiction. We are analyzing it.
Does that apply to even the ones where it's readily available from TxDOT's STARS 2 system?
What we can do is, and maybe I would have to discuss this with Melanie, but what we can do is, for the 6 jurisdictional boundaries, what we have evaluated, we can, if on the 10 high injury network corridors, if we have the volumes readily available, we can calculate the crash rate for those 10 corridors. But collecting the traffic volumes throughout the RGB MPO and calculating the crash road rate for each and every roadway is not a part of our scope of work.
Okay, well, for how about for the corridor? I mean, if you go back, can you go back to the map?
I'm sorry.
Can you go back to one of the maps on the slides?
Melanie, can
Yeah,
we
like
go
that
to the
one.
call?
For that one, for example. I mean, all the different corridors, they have different lengths, and one's gonna be 1 mile, 2 mile, 3 miles, or whatever it may be. And just for like a more of a even comparison, the density may not, the number of accidents in a small section may have, the density of crashes per mile may be different. So I think it's important to include the road mileage on at least for some of this data, to show the crash rate per mile or whatever it may be, or per million. Well, you can't, if you're not collecting data, I guess you can't do it per million vehicles, it'd be entering vehicles or anything like that. But either use mileage or the length of a corridor for these corridors to provide a density of crashes, or collect some data on at least some of them, which are currently available for free. to do some type of rates is what I would recommend.
That's a good suggestion. We can definitely look into it. But what I would like to mention that, as I mentioned earlier, that for the corridors on the high injury network, if the traffic volumes are available, we can definitely do it. But for example, on the map, what we have in front of us, if we look at corridor G, right? And it appears that G is on either side of a major arterial or a freeway. Uh, we won't be able to separate out into two different segments of G. We can take an average based on the average of the traffic volume for the entire segment of G and try to calculate the crash rate. Would that work? Or would that provide any indication for comparison
Well,
purposes?
well, to see how it ranks, each one of these corridors or the MPO in total, to see how it ranks compared to other regions in the nation and in the state, you're gonna have to provide some type of rate, either by volume or road miles or something like that. Otherwise, you're not gonna be able to do, just having you know, uh, obviously, where there's like Houston and Dallas, they're going to have more crashes. But when you actually compare the rates, are we at more, I guess, at risk for being in a crash for our area? So I think it is important to have some type of rates or something so we can readily compare ourselves to other regions and other areas in the state and nation, as requested previously.
Okay. Ruta, any thoughts on it?
I think, Nan, like you were suggesting before, right? That yes, if we can find volumes, maybe we can talk to Melanie about this and see if there are volumes available. Also, we'll have to look at these corridors closely because sometimes, the classification of the corridors itself also changes, and we can definitely calculate the crash rates. The only caveat is if there is readily available volumes. And Benjamin will definitely dive into it and look into it. If we can find that, then we can at least give you crash rates for these corridors that Nan mentioned.
Thank you, Nayan and Ruda. And thanks, Ben.
Yeah,
I
and
think
Go ahead.
I think he also shared the text dot link where we can find some of that data. So thank you so much for that. I will definitely dive into it and get back to you guys.
Ben and Chris, the suggestions or recommendations, what you have provided, they are really good. And it's definitely going to help the region. Thanks for that. Any other questions or suggestions? Hearing none, the next steps on the project, we are identifying the improvements and strategies and we plan to have the action plan in a draft format to be submitted to RGV MPO by the end of this month. And then we would be developing the action plan, which we are planning to have it adopted by March of 2025. We would be coming back to this committee um, in March. The date is to be determined.
Well, for the last steering committee meeting, we don't really have a set in stone date, but I will be sending out a survey to all the members just to find the most feasible date and time for that.
Any other items to be discussed or any other questions?
Hearing none, thank you all for attending, and I look forward to our last meeting.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Oh, actually, well, I still got you. This might just be sorry to bring something up at the last second, but
Go
this might
for
just
it.
be more. Yeah, this might just be more of a question just for the consultant. I don't know if everybody necessarily has to hear this anyways, but I was wondering at the end of this plan, um, were you guys going to produce a list of projects that we intend to seek, like safety related projects that we intend to seek funding for in the future?
That's correct, Chris. We're gonna be developing the list of projects that jurisdiction can pursue funding based on those projects for implementation of those projects.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and we'll be able to see that whenever the draft comes out, right?
That's correct.
Okay, I might work with you guys separately a little bit just to because I know we also have like some local priorities that we might be interested in looking into with you guys to see if that could be incorporated into the plan. But I can talk to you guys about that separately.
Okay. We will make sure that we get in touch with you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Chris, and thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.